Welcome to Interview Skills and Tips presented by the Career Center. In today's video, we're going to talk a little bit about different types of interview formats, different types of questions that you might be asked, how to use the STAR method when you're answering, and then finally, how to follow up with the employer after your interview. Starting off with types of interviews and questions. There are a couple different types of interview formats that you might be invited to. So I'll start off by explaining a screening interview. A screening interview is usually a first step in the interview process where the employer is trying to verify some of the information from your application before they invite you on to the next step in the hiring process. A pre-recorded video interview may be when you're sent a link to enter a portal and you'll be presented with different interview questions. You may have about 30 seconds to read the question, and then you'll be prompted to record yourself giving a video answer. And that could be anywhere from maybe 1 minute all the way up to 5 minutes, just depending on the time that the employer allots for you. And you repeat this process by recording your answers to all of the questions until you're done. Then the employer will look at them on their end and decide whether they contact you for the next step. Alternatively, you may have a screening interview through a phone call where an employer will just call you and they may ask you if you meet some of the basic requirements that they're looking for the job. Next, we have a one-on-one interview. This is that traditional style of interview where it's you and possibly the supervisor of the department you're applying for, or perhaps someone who works in human resources. And this could happen in person or online. We also have a panel interview. So that's what you see going on in this photo here. With a panel interview, you'll have 2 or more people who are interviewing you. And this might consist of, again, the supervisor of the department you're applying for, perhaps someone who works in human resources, and maybe even a senior colleague that you might be working with. In a panel interview, it's okay for you to make eye contact with different people. It's okay for you to ask questions to different people, and each person may have a different role. So for example, they may take turns asking you questions, or someone may be a note taker. Next, we have a group interview. While this style is a little less common, a group interview is when an employer invites multiple candidates to come in for an interview at the same time, and they may be asked to work on something together, whether that's solving a problem or perhaps coming up with a pitch for a product. And the employer is trying to see, how do all the candidates communicate with one another? How are they interacting and getting along? And how are they overall working as a team? So this might be a little more common if you were applying to perhaps like a marketing position. And finally, we have a technical interview. Technical interviews are common for employers recruiting for engineering, science, or software roles, and they're really just testing the extent of your technical skills or knowledge. So let's jump into the different types of questions that an employer might ask you in an interview. So firstly, we have direct questions. These are usually specific questions that require a response based on your resume. So for example, how has your academic background prepared you for this position? This is really direct. Then we have non-direct questions. So these interview questions are more open-ended and give you the opportunity to decide what direction you'll take when answering them. So you can be a little bit more broad. So for example, if I said, tell me about yourself, there are lots of different things that you could say. Moving on, we have scenario-based questions. A scenario-based question is a made-up situation that an employer will present you with, and they're going to ask, how would you handle it or resolve that situation? Now, while I'm saying that these are normally made up, they are likely going to be related to the position in some way. So for example, an employer could give you this scenario. Imagine that you're assigned to a complex project with vague instructions. How would you approach clarifying the requirements? Another example would be, imagine if you were applying to a role as a cashier and a customer tried to return an item at the store and they didn't have a receipt. How would you handle that situation? Then we have technical questions. So these are questions that are, again, asked to determine the extent of your technical knowledge or skills. So, for example, tell me about a time when you used AutoCAD. What did you use it for, and what was the outcome? Last but not least, we have behavioral interview questions. These are employers' favorite type of questions, and they're very popular. And they're normally asking you to describe a specific past experience so that the employer can understand how you're going to behave if they hire you. And they always require you to tell the employer a story from the past. So here I have a few different examples of behavioral questions. So describe a time you faced a difficult problem at work or school. How did you approach solving it? Another one would be share an example of a time when you had conflict with someone. How did you resolve it? Or tell me about a time when you successfully explained a technical concept to someone in simpler terms. So all of these questions are requiring you to think back to the past and tell me a story, or the situation that you were in and how you behaved. This is where the STAR method comes in handy. So what is the STAR method anyway? It's a formula that helps us tell a complete story when we're answering behavioral interview questions. And what it stands for is situation, task, action, and result. So if I were to ask you, describe a time you faced a difficult problem at work or school, how did you approach solving it? I'm first going to describe the situation that I was in, and I'm going to spend most of my time doing that. Then I'm going to explain to you the tasks that I was responsible for and the actions that I took in that situation to respond. And finally, I'll share the result or the outcome with you. And the result could be many things. It could be, it all worked out at the end, or I learned something from this situation, or here's the tangible impact that I made, or perhaps you got positive feedback from someone. So think about, telling that full story to the employer. Now I'm going to break this down even further for you. So here's our behavioral interview question again. Describe a time you faced a difficult problem at work or school. How did you approach solving it? And I'm going to break down my answer for you. So I might say, well, a time that I faced a difficult situation at work was when I was working as a lab assistant on campus to help maintain supplies and equipment. The challenge that I was facing was that the inventory was disorganized and a lot of the items were misplaced. Now, I was responsible for the task of ensuring all of the supplies and equipment were kept orderly so that any students could conduct their experiments efficiently. Given that I had this challenge, I took action by scheduling a meeting with my lab supervisor to create a plan to organize and update the inventory, and then I created a sign-out sheet for students to use whenever they borrowed material. As a result, the supervisor appreciated my initiative and productivity in the lab increased. And that's my whole story that I'm telling to the employer. Let's go over some other helpful tips for an interview. So, minding our body language. So, a lot of the way that you communicate with someone actually comes from your body language and how you're presenting yourself. So, it's good to make eye contact, smile, sit up straight with your shoulders back, and appear relaxed and present in that conversation. It's also good to take a deep breath, before you speak so that you're articulating yourself and you're speaking calm, in a pleasant tone. We can also use the STAR method in our answers so that we're really explaining in detail how we use our skills and how we've responded to different situations, and avoid large gestures. So what I mean by this is try to avoid doing anything that might be distracting from the story that you're telling to the employer, and show that you've researched the company through your answers. Now, sometimes students ask, is it okay to ask the employer to repeat the question? Or is it okay if you need some extra time to think? Or what if you don't understand a question and you need it explained to you? So the answer is that it is okay to ask the employer all of those things. So, can you please repeat the question? Can I have another moment to think? Or can you clarify what you're asking? All of those are okay. An interview is a conversation. It's not a test and it's not an interrogation. And it's okay if you need some extra explanation as well. So once you've made it through the interview, we're not quite done. There's a few more steps that we want to take to stand out. After the interview, it's best practice to ask 3 to 5 thoughtful questions. These are questions that ideally will relate to the position that you're applying to or be about the company in general. So, some examples could be what projects can I expect to work on if I'm selected for this position? Or can you describe what the training process will be like? Is the team facing any challenges right now? What went well with the last person who was in this position? Can you tell me a little bit more about the dynamic of the team or the company culture? And what are next steps in the hiring process? And there's many more questions you can ask as well. Those are just a few examples. You can also ask, what's the best way to follow up with you? In case you don't hear back from the employer right away, it is okay for you to reach out to them. And I would recommend doing so the next day after your interview, at the very least, to promptly send a follow up thank you email. And I have an example to show you. So, one day after your interview, it's always good to send this follow up thank you email because it shows the employer that you're interested in the position, you care where you stand as a candidate, and you're grateful for the opportunity to have that interview. So, what we have here is good morning, Nicole. I hope you're doing well. I'm following up regarding my interview yesterday at 3 p.m. I really enjoyed learning more about the position and the needs of ABC Company, and I'm confident my skills in Python and C would benefit the team. Thank you for taking the time to speak with me, and good luck with the hiring decision. Sincerely, James Bond. So, this is an example of a really polite, professional, and short email that we can send to an employer to follow up with them. This is a really important step because a lot of candidates skip over it, and it could be a way that you help yourself stand out. If you'd like any more tips on how to prepare for your interview, before, how to answer questions during, or how to connect with an employer afterwards, you're always welcome to book an appointment with the Career Center. Thanks for watching.